Hello everyone. So in this video, we will be learning about grid columns in Tailwind CSS. So that's what I'll be walking you guys through. And basically, grid columns is a way to arrange your components in a grid way. So in that way, we are able to arrange all your components in a neat way. And then it's really able to make changes when you're actually changing between your screens. Let's say you have changed your responsiveness to mobile version, so in mobile it will be like a better way to arrange your components. So that's when grid columns will be able to come in use. So let's get started. So as you can see here, in grid column we are able to make use of all of these particular classes here. And this is basically having the CSS grid column properties. And also all you have to do is just need to call grid calls and the number of columns that we would like to have in a particular row. Let's say this is number 3 here, grid call 3, and this literally means that the maximum number of columns supposed to be there in a group should be 3. So whenever there's more than 3 components, you will be able to see that you will go to the next line. For example, the first 3 components here are actually on the first row because it's actually filling up the space that has been designated for your first row, which is three columns. So, and let's say it's the fourth one is basically does not fit inside the first row, so that's the reason why it goes to the bottom here. And as you can see, the reason why the 4 is actually filling up 2 spaces of 2 span faces. For example, that's the reason why it's using call span 2, and that's the reason why this particular fourth component is actually making use of 2 columns. And then number 5 is actually like the usual one, that's like only will fill 1 out of the 3 columns that we have already designated. And same goes to 7 and 6 here. So this is how basic column spanning works. So span is basically making use of like spanning number of columns, and number of, as you can see, n is basically the number of columns that it will be occupying. And next we also can see that it's also able to make use of starting and ending lines. So this is basically, let's say if you were to say your column should start from 2. So that's the reason why you can see number 1, the component 1 here starts from the second column, and actually it spans until your 5th column, because there are total number of 6 columns has been designated. So you start from 2 and then you add 4, you just go to your 5th column right here. And that's the reason why we are making use of starting and ending lines for grid columns. You just need to add start call and end. Sometimes you can also use end call 7, for example, like how you have actually made it. So component number 3 here, we have only used column end 7 and call span 2. So you need to make use of the starting and ending properties to start your from which particular column. And that's the basic idea of starting and ending lines. Next, I would like to show you an example of how are we able to make use of grid columns in real code. And let's head back to our code here. And there you go. This is a simple React project that I've just made it. For example, this is an example where it is basically making use of these cards here. These cards are considered the divs that are able to fill the space of your column. So in this case, as you can see here, since there are 3 columns have been occupying your row space here, so that basically your grid column should be grid calls 3. Let's go to our code here. And in our code, we are able to see that I've used grid calls 3, and then there's 3 components that are actually being used here. And of course, I'll just give the gap to be 8, so to make sure there's some space in between. And let's say if I were to add another card here, so then the most simple thing that would happen is basically the 4th component will be going to the next row, by the way. So that's how it works. Let's check the browser, and there you go. This is how it's supposed to work. For example, because the column span for a single row is actually 3, and whenever there's more than 3, it goes to the next line. So what happens if I were to use call span 2? For example, let's say if I were to use block 1 here, and if I said call span 2, and let's go to our code here, and we are able to make use of the 4th one here to make like call span 2. For example, in this case I have to say div, and this div I have to place the card here, take this thing and put it inside here, and I have to have some class name inside here, and this class name is going to be saying call span of 2, span 2. And let's click save and head back to our browser here. And as you can see here, this particular card component here is actually making use of 2 spaces that are actually designated for 3. So it's basically taking 2 space out of 3 spaces that are designated for a particular row. So if I were to put 3 call span 3, and let's see what happens, because basically the basic idea is it will space the whole space like this, example like this. So this is how we are able to make use of call span properties to make sure to fill the number of to occupy the number of columns that are actually designated for a particular row. Let's try, let's say if I were to add another column, for example, let's say 4, number 4 here, because we are actually making more than the number of designated number of columns. For example, in this case, we have only made 3 to be the limit. Let's say if I put 4 here, so let's see what happens. As you can see, it does not do anything, because that's the basic idea, like does not go against the rules. So this is how we put number 3 here. And let's make this particular grid columns here to become responsive. For example, let's say if I would make like this, you can see this is not actually responsive enough, because it must be able to make 2 columns or 1 columns when the size of the responsive screen size changes. So as you can see, let's say if I were to shrink the size here, this particular should only be 2 components like this. Then now one way we can actually do is that we need to make sure that we are able to go to our class name here. We should add some screen sizes. So let's say this grid calls 3 here, which should only come out when it is large screen. Okay, so large screen, it will have 3 columns. What happens if we were to put in a medium sized screen? So in medium sized screen, we need to put MD. So basically in MD, I would like to have only 2 columns. I'm going to copy this exact thing here. So in this case, inside MD here, I like to say grid calls 2. And let's say if I was another smaller screen, this case I like to say SS. SS is basically the one of the smallest sizes for screen. For example, let's say grid calls. In this case, I like to say grid calls 1. Like this. So example, as you can see here, for large screen, I've said grid calls 3. For medium sized screen, I've put grid calls supposed to be 2. And the smallest screen, I'll be saying grid calls to be 1. So this is how a basic idea of grid columns should be, and they should be able to change their size according to the size of the screen. So let's click save and let's check our browser, and there you go. Right now this is your browser here. Let's open my inspect here. I like to inspect. Okay, as you can see here, this is how it's supposed to be, because we have already made it like whenever there's a phone screen here, I mean phone sitting in the smaller screen, and that's the reason why you are able to see there's one row here. Let's say if I would remove this particular mobile screen size, remove this. So you can see there's 3 here. Let's say if I would like close this, and I would like to make this browser to become smaller. And as you can see, this is mobile. This is a smaller screen. If I were to enlarge the screen like this, and there you go. Right now you are able to see two cards here, because we have already made medium-sized screens to have 2 cards like this. And if I were to enlarge a bit like this, for example, let's say if I put like this, and then there you go. When your screen size is large, and this is how you look like, you'll be having 3 cards like this. So this is the basic idea of how are we able to make use of grid columns with Tailwind CSS. And that's it for this part of the video. Thanks for watching. Let's catch up on the next one.